The velvet darkness of the Imperial ballroom pressed against the windows as Princess Philomena Carrington watched the dancers from her secluded alcove. Beyond the gilt and crystal magnificence, snow fell on St. Petersburg, blanketing the Russian capital in silence. Court life in 1875 was a series of beautiful prisons, and Philomena, daughter of the British ambassador, had perfected the art of smiling captivity. A vision of diplomatic perfection, her father had called her earlier that evening, straightening her sapphire tiara. "Remember, Philly, we serve the crown and empire. Personal sentiment has no place in matters of state." She had nodded, as always. At 22, Philomena understood that her beauty and intelligence were merely political assets. Love was a luxury for common folk, not for the daughter of an imperial ambassador navigating the treacherous waters between Britain and Russia during the Great Game. The orchestra struck up another Strauss waltz. Through the whirl of uniforms and silk gowns, she caught the eye of Duke Victor Derrington, special envoy to Her Majesty Queen Victoria. Tall and severe in his formal attire, with eyes the color of a winter sea, the Duke had arrived in St. Petersburg 3 weeks ago. His reputation preceded him, brilliant, ruthless in negotiation, and utterly devoted to the expansion of British influence. At 34, he remained unmarried, a fact that caused much speculation among the court ladies. "He has no heart," whispered Countess Olga earlier. "Only ambition." Philomena looked away from his penetrating gaze. She had learned early that duty was the only safe harbor in the storm of international politics. Her father's position, and the family's precarious finances, depended on her making an advantageous match, preferably with a Russian nobleman who could strengthen Anglo-Russian relations. Princess Carrington. The deep voice startled her from her thoughts. Duke Derrington stood before her, bowing with perfect formality. "I believe you've been avoiding me." "Your Grace." She curtsied, her face a practiced mask of polite interest. "I assure you, avoidance requires deliberate intent. I simply haven't had the pleasure." A hint of amusement touched his lips. "Then perhaps you might remedy that by granting me this dance." Protocol demanded acceptance. Her father, watching from across the room, nodded approvingly as the Duke led her onto the floor. His hand at her waist was firm but proper, the precise distance between their bodies maintained as they joined the waltz. "You speak Russian with remarkable fluency," he observed as they turned. "Necessity, Your Grace. One cannot navigate court politics through interpreters. And I hear you've charmed the Tsar himself with your knowledge of Pushkin." Philomena kept her expression neutral despite her surprise at his intelligence gathering. Poetry transcends political boundaries. A shared appreciation for beauty can sometimes accomplish what treaties cannot. Something shifted in his gaze, a momentary crack in his diplomatic veneer. An interesting philosophy for someone so young. "Age has little bearing on observation, Your Grace. We all play our assigned roles." The waltz brought them near a cluster of Russian officers, and she seamlessly switched to Russian, commenting on the evening's entertainment with perfect pronunciation. When they were alone again, the Duke lowered his voice. "Your father has ambitious plans for you." Her step faltered slightly, but his lead was strong enough to disguise it. "All fathers do, I imagine. Count Orloff seems particularly favored." Quite the match it would be, adjoining British diplomatic blood with Russian nobility. The mention of her suspected suitor sent a chill through her. Count Mikhail Orloff, 46, twice widowed, with children older than herself, had been increasingly attentive. Her father's encouragement of the match was thinly veiled. "Political alliances come in many forms," she replied carefully. The music concluded, and Derrington bowed. "Indeed they do, Princess. I look forward to seeing which form yours takes." As he walked away, Philomena felt an unexpected disappointment. For a moment during their dance, she'd sensed something genuine beneath his calculated exterior, a recognition, perhaps, of their shared captivity in the golden cage of empire. 3 days later, a blizzard howled outside the embassy windows as Philomena translated diplomatic correspondence in her father's study. Ambassador Carrington had fallen ill with a winter cough, leaving her to manage the routine communications. A knock at the door revealed Stevens, their butler, bearing a silver tray. An urgent dispatch from the Winter Palace, miss. The sealed envelope bore the Imperial eagle. Inside was an invitation. The Grand Duchess Olga was hosting an intimate musical evening. Attendance was requested, not commanded, but in Imperial Russia, such distinctions were meaningless. More troubling was the personal note scrawled at the bottom: Count Orloff particularly hopes for your presence. Philomena closed her eyes briefly. Her father would insist she attend, even through the blizzard. Each appearance with Orloff drew the noose of expectation tighter. "Shall I inform your father?" Stevens asked. No need to disturb his rest. Please have the sleigh prepared. Hours later, bundled in furs against the bitter cold, Philomena was escorted through the servants' entrance of the Anichkov Palace. The storm had made the main approach impassable, forcing a less dignified arrival through the kitchens. Removing her snow-dusted cloak, she was startled to find Duke Derrington similarly delayed, shaking snow from his greatcoat. "Princess Carrington," he said with evident surprise. "I wouldn't have expected your father to permit you out in such weather." "My father's illness prevented him from forbidding it." She attempted to tidy her wind-tousled hair. "Duty calls, regardless of nature's opposition." "Always duty." Something in his tone made her look up sharply. For a moment, his carefully maintained expression slipped, revealing a weariness that mirrored her own. A palace servant led them through the back corridors, a meandering route that offered glimpses of the Imperial Russian life rarely seen by foreign visitors. As they passed a dimly lit gallery, the Duke suddenly caught her elbow, pulling her into an alcove behind a massive tapestry. "What are you?" she began, but he pressed a finger to his lips. Voices approached, Count Orloff and Baron Volsky, speaking rapidly in Russian. "The British are suspicious," Orloff was saying. "Derrington asks too many questions about the Central Asian movements." "The girl provides perfect cover," Volsky replied. "Once you've married her, her father's position is compromised. He'll have no choice but to supply the information we need or risk his daughter becoming a widow." They passed by, their voices fading into the corridor. Philomena stood frozen, the blood draining from her face. "I suspected as much," Derrington murmured, releasing her arm. "Forgive the liberty, Princess, but I thought you should hear the truth." "They're using me," she whispered, the full implications washing over her. Not just a political marriage, but a trap for her father, for British interests. "As we all are used, in service to empire." His expression was grim. Though some uses are more malevolent than others. Philomena straightened her shoulders, forcing composure through the shock. "Thank you for this intelligence, Your Grace. I shall adjust my strategy accordingly." "Victor," he said suddenly. "When we're not surrounded by Imperial spies, I am simply Victor." The unexpected intimacy of his given name startled her more than Orloff's scheming. "I don't think. For once, don't think of duty or protocol." His voice softened. "Just remember there is a person beneath this diplomatic uniform who sees the person beneath yours." Before she could respond, he guided her back to the corridor, his manner returning to perfect formality as they rejoined the palace servants leading them to the music room. Throughout the evening's performance, Philomena maintained her diplomatic poise while her mind raced. She smiled at Count Orloff's attentions, laughed at his jokes, and accepted his escort to the supper table, all while seeing him anew as the predator he was. Across the room, Duke Derrington, Victor, watched with hooded eyes as he engaged the Grand Duchess in conversation. 3 weeks passed in a delicate dance of deception. Philomena played the role of Orloff's increasingly receptive interest while secretly meeting with Victor in the embassy gardens, ostensibly discussing cultural exchanges while actually plotting to expose the Russian scheme without triggering a diplomatic incident. "You understand what this means," Victor said during one such meeting, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air as they walked between ice-crusted topiary. "If we reveal Orloff's plot prematurely, your father's position becomes untenable. St. Petersburg would become too dangerous for you both. And if we wait too long, I find myself trapped in marriage to a man who intends to use me against my country and likely dispose of me afterward." She kept her voice steady through force of will. Neither option preserves both duty and safety. Victor stopped walking, turning to face her. In the weeks of their secret collaboration, the formal barriers between them had gradually eroded, revealing a man far different from the cold diplomat she'd first encountered. Behind his calculated exterior lay a mind that valued poetry as much as politics, and a surprising tenderness toward the servants and common folk they encountered. "There is another possibility," he said carefully. "One that preserves your safety, if not your current position." "I'm listening." "Return to England. I've influence enough to secure you a position as a translator for the Foreign Office. Your linguistic abilities are wasted in the performance of court niceties." Hope flared briefly before reality extinguished it. "And abandon my father? Disgrace him before the diplomatic corps? You know I cannot." "Then what would you choose, if duty didn't bind you?" The question struck her like a physical blow. No one had ever asked what she wanted. She faltered. "I hardly know anymore. Freedom to use my mind, perhaps. To translate great works between cultures. To serve a purpose greater than being decorative or politically convenient." His gloved hand touched her cheek, a gesture so unexpected that she didn't think to pull away. "You are extraordinary, Philomena Carrington. Far too valuable to be sacrificed as a pawn in this imperial game." For one breath, one heartbeat, the world narrowed to the warmth of his palm against her skin and the intensity in his eyes. Then reality reasserted itself in the form of Stephen's calling from the embassy doorway. "Miss! Your father is asking for you." They separated instantly, the moment broken. Victor bowed formally, as though they'd been discussing nothing more significant than the weather. "Consider my proposal, Princess. There are always more moves in the game than first appear." That night, unable to sleep, Philomena stood at her bedroom window watching the lights of St. Petersburg glitter like fallen stars. Her father's condition had worsened, and the doctor's prognosis was grim in months, not years. In his feverish state, he had clutched her hand and whispered, "Secure your future, Philly. The Count will protect you when I'm gone." If only he knew the truth. A soft tap at her door revealed her maid, Anna, with a folded note. "Delivered by hand, miss." The messenger said it couldn't wait till morning. The elegant script was unmistakably Victor's: "The Hermitage, Egyptian Hall, noon tomorrow. Vital information. Come alone. Trust no one else with this." Dawn brought a courier from the Winter Palace, Count Orloff, requesting her company for a sleigh ride that afternoon. The timing made refusing impossible without arousing suspicion. She would have to meet Victor and still make the appointment with Orloff afterward. The Hermitage was quiet at midday, most visitors taking luncheon. Philomena slipped through the grand galleries until she reached the Egyptian collection, her heart pounding with an anxiety she couldn't entirely attribute to political intrigue. Victor stood before a glass case containing papyrus scrolls, his back to her. He turned at her approach, his face grave. "Thank you for coming. We haven't much time." He guided her to a secluded corner behind a massive sarcophagus. "There's been a development. Orloff has accelerated his timeline. He plans to propose formally at the Tsar's birthday celebration next week." "So soon?" Cold dread settled in her stomach. "My father is too ill to resist such an advantageous match." "There's more." Victor's voice dropped lower. "I've received intelligence that Orloff's first wife didn't die of fever as reported. There were suspicious circumstances, poison is suspected. The investigation was quietly abandoned after substantial payments to the right officials." Philomena felt the blood drain from her face. "He means to marry me, use me against my father, and then—" "I believe so." Victor's hands gripped hers tightly. "I cannot allow it. What choice do I have? If I refuse him publicly, it creates a diplomatic incident. If I flee to England, my father is left vulnerable. If I accept—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "There is another option." Victor's expression was intense, almost fierce. Marry me instead. She stared at him, certain she had misheard. What? A marriage between us serves multiple purposes. It removes you from Olaf's reach without creating an international incident. One British noble marrying another is hardly scandalous. It provides protection for your father through my connections. And He hesitated. It would not be merely political. Her pulse thundered in her ears. What are you saying? That I began this acquaintance with diplomatic intentions and find myself unable to maintain that pretense. That watching you navigate this perilous court with such intelligence and grace has undone my carefully constructed defenses. His thumb traced her palm. That the thought of you in danger has become intolerable to me. Victor? Her voice was barely audible. We can't possibly. Can't we? A rare smile softened his features. Consider it logically, if emotion seems too dangerous. We share intellectual interests, political alignments, and a common purpose. Beyond that. His eyes held hers. Beyond that, I believe there is something neither of us expected to find in St. Petersburg. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed in the gallery beyond. They separated instantly, Victor moving to examine a display case as a group of Russian officers passed through. I must go, she whispered when they were alone again. Olaf expects me at 3. And what shall you tell him when he speaks of marriage? She hesitated, torn between fear and a strange, growing certainty. That I require time to consider such an important decision. And what of my proposal? I need time for that as well. His expression grew serious again. Time is the one luxury we don't have, Philomena. Olaf is dangerous, and your father's health declines daily. Whatever you decide, it must be soon. She nodded, gathering her courage before stepping away. Tomorrow. I'll have an answer tomorrow. The sleigh ride with Count Olaf was an exercise in controlled terror. His solicitous manner, once merely tedious, now seemed sinister. Each compliment carried the undertone of acquisition rather than admiration. When his gloved hand covered hers, she forced herself not to flinch. You seem preoccupied today, my dear, he observed as their sleigh glided through the Winter Palace gardens. Forgive me. My father's health concerns me. All the more reason to secure your future. His smile didn't reach his eyes. A woman alone in St. Petersburg faces many difficulties. A woman with powerful protection, however. I am grateful for your interest, Count. More than interest, I think. He signaled the driver to slow as they approached a secluded pavilion. I had hoped to save this for the Tsar celebration, but perhaps the moment is now. Panic fluttered in her chest as he reached inside his fur coat. Instead of a ring, however, he withdrew a folded document. A property deed, he explained, opening it for her inspection. A summer estate near Moscow. Wedding gift from the Tsar himself, in anticipation of our union. Quite unusual for a foreigner to receive such a grant. The implication was clear, the marriage was already considered settled at the highest levels of Russian government. Refusing would create more than a personal slight. I'm overwhelmed, she managed to say. Such generosity requires careful consideration. His smile tightened. Of course. Though I've already discussed the match with your father. In his weakened state, he was most grateful for my assurances regarding your future. The sleigh continued its circuit, but Philomena barely noticed the winter landscape. By approaching her father directly, Olaf had neatly removed her last avenue of refusal. A daughter defying her dying father's wishes would be not only scandalous but cruel. That evening, she sat at her father's bedside, holding his thin hand as he drifted between sleep and feverish wakefulness. Olaf is a good match, he murmured. Influential. Connected to the Tsar himself. Yes, father. She stroked his forehead with a cool cloth. But are you certain it's what you wish for me? His eyes fluttered open. What else is there for you? England is too far without protection. The diplomatic corps has no place for women, despite your talents. He squeezed her hand weakly. I failed to provide for you properly. This match remedies my failure. Tears stung her eyes. You've never failed me. Promise me you'll accept him, Philly. Promise me you'll be secure. The word stuck in her throat, but her father's pleading expression broke her resistance. I promise to secure my future, father. He relaxed, satisfied with what he took as agreement. As he drifted back to sleep, Philomena remained motionless, the weight of imperial expectations crushing down upon her shoulders. Near midnight, unable to bear her circling thoughts, she slipped down to her father's study. If she must make an impossible choice, she would at least do so with complete information. The diplomatic archives might contain something on Olaf's past, something to confirm or refute Victor's claims about his first wife. She was deep in the files when a soft knock startled her. Stevens entered, his expression troubled. Forgive the intrusion, miss, but Duke Derrington is at the service entrance. He insists the matter cannot wait until morning. Her heart jumped. Show him in, please. Discreetly. Minutes later, Victor appeared, snow dusting his dark coat. His face was grim. Forgive the hour, but there's been a development. He glanced at the files spread before her. You've been conducting your own investigation, I see. What's happened? Olaf has accelerated his timeline again. The Tsar has approved your marriage to take place in 3 days' time, not after the birthday celebration. 3 days. Her voice rose in alarm. That's impossible. The arrangements alone would be handled by the Imperial household. Everything is being prepared. He stepped closer. Philomena, I believe they suspect our communication. This hasty timeline is designed to prevent any interference. She sank into her father's chair, mind racing. He approached my father directly. Secured his blessing while he's too weak to question anything. I all but promised him I would accept Olaf. And will you? Victor's voice was carefully controlled. She looked up at him, this man who had transformed from diplomatic adversary to something she hardly dared name. If I refuse, my father will be devastated in his final months. If I accept, I may not survive to see his passing. And if you choose another path entirely? The question hung in the air between them. In that moment, the embassy study with its maps of empires and documents of state seemed to recede, leaving only 2 people stripped of titles and position. I hardly know who I am apart from my duty, she whispered. The ambassador's daughter. The perfect diplomat's child. If I set that aside, what remains? Philomena remains. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Brilliant linguist. Strategic mind. Courageous spirit. The woman who recites Pushkin from memory and corrects my Russian pronunciation. The woman who notices the servant's needs before her own comfort. Tears blurred her vision. And what of your duty? Wouldn't marrying me complicate your mission here? My duty extends beyond this post. I serve the Crown by protecting its interests, which now include preventing a valuable British subject from falling into hands that would use her against us. His expression softened. And beyond duty? I find myself unwilling to leave St. Petersburg without you, regardless of political expedience. Is that a declaration, Your Grace? Despite everything, a smile touched her lips. It is whatever you need it to be. His thumb traced the inside of her wrist where her pulse raced. An offer of protection. A diplomatic solution. Or something neither of us expected to find in the midst of Imperial games. He raised her hand to his lips. The choice is yours, Philomena. But it must be made tonight. She closed her eyes, weighing duty against survival, her father's wishes against her own future. When she opened them again, certainty had replaced confusion. I choose a third path, she said quietly. Neither Olaf's victim nor England's refugee. I will secure my future, as I promised my father. But I will do so on my own terms. Dawn broke over St. Petersburg, painting the snow-covered city in pale gold as the last of the preparations were completed. Ambassador Carrington, supported by 2 footmen, was settled into a well-cushioned chair in the embassy's small chapel. His confusion at the hasty arrangements had given way to weak acceptance when Philomena explained that Count Orloff had been called away on urgent business for the Tsar. But the Duke is of excellent family, she had assured him. Trusted by the Queen herself. Our union will strengthen diplomatic ties without compromising our British interests. Now she stood before the Anglican chaplain, her simple blue gown a stark contrast to the elaborate Russian wedding she had narrowly avoided. Victor stood beside her, his expression serene but his eyes bright with something that belied his diplomatic composure. The ceremony was brief, the witnesses few, only her father, Stevens, and 2 British diplomatic staff. No representatives from the Winter Palace were present, the invitations had been intentionally delayed, to be delivered after the fact. I, Victor, take thee, Philomena. His voice was steady as he made his vows, his hand warm around hers. When the chaplain pronounced them man and wife, the kiss they shared was brief but held a promise that made her cheeks flush. Her father applauded weakly, genuine pleasure on his tired face. Well done, Philly, he whispered as she knelt beside his chair. The Duke will take good care of you. Yes, father, she replied, kissing his forehead. I believe he will. The Imperial response came swiftly. Within hours of the marriage being announced, a delegation arrived from the Winter Palace bearing the Tsar's congratulations, a thinly veiled command for an audience the following day. It will be unpleasant, Victor warned as they prepared to face the Imperial court. Orloff will have poisoned the well thoroughly. Let him try. Philomena adjusted the sapphire necklace at her throat, Victor's wedding gift, hastily procured. We've broken no laws or protocols. A British diplomat marrying a British subject is perfectly proper. Proper, but inconvenient for their plans. He offered his arm. Together, then. Together. The Winter Palace reception room was frigid despite the roaring fires. The Tsar himself was absent, sending Grand Duke Constantine in his place, a calculated slight. Count Orloff stood at the Grand Duke's right hand, his expression thunderous. Duke and Duchess Derrington, the herald announced, using her new title for the first time. They advanced across the gleaming floor, the assembled Russian nobility watching with undisguised curiosity. Victor's hand rested reassuringly against her back as they bowed before the Grand Duke. Such haste, Constantine remarked, his tone sharp. One might almost suspect deliberate discourtesy to our court, which had taken special interest in Princess Carrington's future. No discourtesy intended, Your Imperial Highness, Victor replied smoothly. Merely a response to Ambassador Carrington's declining health. He wished to see his daughter settled before his condition worsens. How convenient that her settlement aligned with British rather than Russian interests. Orloff's voice dripped with barely contained fury. Particularly when the Tsar himself had approved a different arrangement. Philomena stepped forward, her chin raised. Count Orloff, while I am deeply honored by your attention, my father's greatest wish was for my happiness as well as security. As Duchess Derrington, I remain in St. Petersburg, continuing my cultural and linguistic work. The bridges between our nations remain intact. Bridges. Orloff nearly spat the word. Or barricades? That depends entirely on one's intentions. Victor's smile was razor-sharp. Those seeking honest diplomacy will find the door open. Those with other objectives might indeed find their path obstructed. The implications hung in the air. After a tense moment, Grand Duke Constantine laughed, breaking the dangerous tension. Well played, Derrington. The British Crown is fortunate in its representatives. He waved a dismissive hand at Orloff. The Tsar accepts the marriage and extends his belated blessings. Though perhaps the Duke's posting might soon require reassignment. Victor bowed again. We serve at our monarch's pleasure, of course. though Her Majesty values continuity in delicate diplomatic situations. The audience concluded shortly after, leaving no doubt that their position in St. Petersburg had been compromised. As they descended the palace steps to their waiting carriage, Victor's expression was thoughtful. "We've perhaps 6 months before they manufacture a reason to demand my recall," he mused. "Possibly less if Orloff's influence prevails. Long enough for my father's comfort, at least." Philomena gazed out at the glittering city that had been her home for 3 years. And then? Constantinople, perhaps. The Ottoman court has requested an experienced British envoy. Or perhaps Vienna. The Austro-Hungarian situation grows more complex by the day. Another imperial court, another set of protocols to master. She smiled slightly. Another language to perfect. Unless... He hesitated. Unless you wished for something different. London, perhaps. A life less nomadic. My family estate in Derbyshire. Wherever you might find purpose. She turned to him, this man who had offered her escape but instead become her partner. In the weeks of their acquaintance, diplomatic necessity had transformed into something neither had anticipated, a union not just of political convenience but of minds, of shared understanding. Purpose is not found in location, she said softly, but in how one's gifts are employed. I've spent my life translating between worlds. Perhaps that skill serves empire, but it might serve something greater, understanding between peoples, bridges of knowledge rather than conquest. And where would you build such bridges? She touched his cheek, a gesture that still felt new and daring. Wherever we are sent. Together. The empires may dictate our movements, but not our hearts or minds. He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Surrender to me tonight, he whispered, and I will surrender to you all the days that follow. As their carriage moved through the snowy streets of St. Petersburg, Philomena leaned against her husband's shoulder. The imperial game continued around them, the machinery of empires grinding forward. But within its rigid structures, they had carved out a space for something empire had not anticipated, a partnership of equals, a translation between worlds that served something beyond flags and crowns. The night pressed against the carriage windows, vast and dark as Russia itself. But inside, wrapped in the warmth of chosen commitment rather than commanded duty, Philomena found herself unafraid of either the darkness or the dawn that would follow.